Imagine a world where criminals believe they'd finally outsmarted law enforcement. A world where drug cartels, arms traffickers, and organized crime syndicates could coordinate massive operations without fear of being monitored. Their conversations encrypted, their identities hidden, their operations unstoppable. Now imagine that the very tool they trusted most, the app they believed was their secret weapon, was designed, built, and quietly controlled by the FBI. This isn't fiction, this isn't a movie. This is Operation Trojan Shield. In 2018, after dismantling a major encrypted phone service used by criminals, the FBI faced a choice: keep chasing criminal communications from the outside, or get inside the system itself. Their solution? Create a fully functional encrypted messaging app, Anom, market it through trusted criminal intermediaries, and embed it directly into the global underworld. The plan worked better than anyone had anticipated. Over the next 3 years, over 12,000 devices were distributed across more than 100 countries. Over 300 criminal organizations came to rely on Anom for their daily operations. Millions of secret messages about drug shipments, assassination plots, and arms deals were silently intercepted in real time. When law enforcement finally pulled the trigger in June 2021, the results were staggering. More than 800 arrests worldwide, over 40 tons of narcotics seized, 250 weapons recovered, nearly $50 million in cash and cryptocurrencies confiscated. Operation Trojan Shield wasn't just one of the most successful sting operations in history, it was a blueprint for how crime and policing will evolve in a digital world. It also raises deeper questions. How far should law enforcement go in infiltrating private communications? Can trust and encryption survive when even secure apps might be traps? And what happens next now that criminals know the rules have changed? This is the story of Operation Trojan Shield, how an app designed to promise secrecy ended up becoming one of the FBI's greatest weapons, and how thousands of criminals helped build their own downfall, one message at a time. The idea behind Operation Trojan Shield didn't happen overnight. It began with a gap, one that law enforcement realized they could exploit. In 2018, the FBI, working alongside international partners, managed to take down Phantom Secure, a Canadian company that provided encrypted phones almost exclusively to criminal organizations. Phantom Secure's shutdown created a power vacuum. Organized crime networks were left scrambling for a new, trusted communications platform. And that's when the FBI made a bold decision. Instead of just waiting for criminals to find a new app, they would create one themselves. An encrypted platform built to appear legitimate, distributed through criminal channels, but secretly designed to give law enforcement real-time access to everything shared on it. The idea was simple but ambitious. Make it exclusive, invite only, to build credibility. Make it secure-looking, with features criminals expected, encrypted messaging, hidden access, device lockdowns, and most importantly, make it covert, with no obvious links to law enforcement. The operation's centerpiece was a custom-built messaging app known as Anom. It was installed on specially modified Android phones that had all standard apps and functions stripped away. The messaging function was hidden behind a dummy calculator app. Users had to enter a secret code to access Anom. Every message sent through the app was automatically copied to a server controlled by the FBI and partner agencies. Because the devices could only communicate with other Anom devices, criminals felt a false sense of security, believing they were part of an elite, untouchable network. But in reality, the FBI had built a global listening post, hidden inside the very tool criminals thought was protecting them. At first, distribution was limited. The FBI used a confidential human source, a trusted figure in the criminal underworld, who agreed to introduce the devices to key players. The early rollout targeted Australia, where authorities quickly saw criminal groups adopting Anom. From there, the app spread organically, moving across borders and into the hands of major drug trafficking organizations, arms dealers, money launderers, hitmen, and organized crime families. By early 2021, Anom devices were in use across over 100 countries. From biker gangs in Australia, to drug cartels in South America, to mafia organizations in Europe, criminals embraced Anom as their new secure platform, unaware that every message, every plan, and every confession was being carefully collected and patiently watched. After its careful launch in 2018, Anom began to spread across the criminal underworld, but not through traditional marketing or mass distribution. Instead, it grew by word of mouth, fueled by a combination of trust, exclusivity, and necessity. Criminal networks, desperate for a secure replacement after the fall of Phantom Secure, were eager for alternatives. The FBI's confidential human source, who had credibility among organized crime figures, carefully seeded Anom devices to influential criminal players. And it worked. Within months, dozens of Anom devices were circulating among major syndicates in Australia. Criminal organizations in Europe and South America began adopting the platform. High-level traffickers, arms brokers, and gang leaders started promoting Anom within their trusted circles. Because Anom phones were invite-only, they carried an aura of exclusivity. They were marketed as the next Phantom Secure, but even better. Some devices even came with custom features like remote wiping capabilities, stealth mode, and minimal GPS tracking to reassure users that privacy was guaranteed. What the users didn't realize was that the app's architecture had been deliberately designed to route messages through FBI-controlled servers, making every conversation, photo, and drug deal visible to investigators almost in real time. By early 2021, the scale of Operation Trojan Shield was staggering. More than 12,000 Anom devices were distributed worldwide. Over 300 criminal organizations were identified using the app. Anom was active in over 100 countries, spanning 6 continents. Criminals believed they had found the perfect solution for secure communication. What they didn't know was that they had voluntarily handed law enforcement an unparalleled look into the inner workings of the global underworld. The FBI, together with agencies like Europol, the Australian Federal Police, and Dutch National Police, monitored these communications quietly, collecting intelligence, mapping networks, and waiting for the right moment to act. Rather than intervene too early, investigators chose patience. Every message collected strengthened criminal cases, providing direct evidence of international drug shipments, weapons smuggling operations, human trafficking networks, corruption, violence, and even contract killings. Criminals were coordinating major operations in plain sight, believing their encrypted communications were beyond the reach of any court or law enforcement agency. But every message was building a case, one that would soon come crashing down. By mid-2021, after nearly 3 years of monitoring Anom traffic, law enforcement agencies around the world had assembled a mountain of intelligence. Every message, every location ping, every intercepted drug deal had been cataloged and cross-referenced. The time had come to act. In early June 2021, law enforcement agencies, led by the FBI, the Australian Federal Police, and Europol, launched a coordinated global crackdown. The operation was codenamed Operation Greenlight/Trojan Shield. It was one of the largest and most complex law enforcement actions ever attempted across borders. More than 800 arrests were made across 16 countries in the span of just a few days. Over 40 tons of drugs were seized, including cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, and cannabis. 250 firearms and 55 luxury vehicles were confiscated. Nearly $50 million in cash and cryptocurrencies was recovered. Entire criminal enterprises were dismantled, with many high-ranking figures taken into custody. Authorities executed hundreds of search warrants simultaneously across Australia, Europe, the United States, and South America. In Australia alone, 224 individuals were arrested, and over 3.7 tons of drugs were seized. The element of surprise was total. Criminals had no idea they were under surveillance. Many were caught mid-negotiation for drug shipments, money laundering deals, or weapon sales. Key seizures included 8 tons of cocaine hidden in banana shipments, weapons caches intended for gang wars, luxury watches, jewelry, and encrypted phones worth millions. In some cases, authorities uncovered detailed plans for violent attacks and assassinations. plots that were disrupted before they could be carried out thanks to anom intercepts. The intelligence also revealed previously unknown connections between criminal syndicates, helping authorities build new long-term investigations into organized crime networks still operating globally. The decision to move when they did was strategic. If authorities had waited longer, criminals might have suspected anom's compromise. If they moved too early, they would have missed critical evidence. By June 2021, investigators judged that they had gathered enough actionable intelligence to justify mass arrests while minimizing the risk of tipping off other targets. It was a high-risk gamble, but it paid off. Within days, the criminal underworld realized it had been talking directly to law enforcement for years, and the resulting shockwaves rattled syndicates from South America to Europe to the Middle East. Operation Trojan Shield wasn't just a law enforcement success story. It was a psychological blow to organized crime worldwide, a reminder that even the tools criminals believe are safe may in fact be their greatest vulnerability. While Operation Trojan Shield was widely praised as a landmark success in law enforcement, it also sparked a series of complex legal and ethical debates, ones that reach beyond just the world of organized crime. Because behind the record arrests and massive drug seizures, there were serious questions about privacy, consent, entrapment, and international law. One of the biggest concerns raised was the nature of the surveillance itself. In essence, law enforcement agencies were operating a global, covert surveillance platform, collecting private communications without individual warrants, monitoring individuals in dozens of countries without those individuals knowing they were being watched. Although anom was specifically marketed to criminal networks, critics asked, does creating a fake communications platform and secretly logging private conversations set a dangerous precedent? Could governments use similar tactics against other groups in the future, outside of organized crime? Supporters argued that no normal citizen was using anom, and that users clearly engaged in discussions about criminal activities. Opponents pointed out that broad, warrantless surveillance can easily drift into gray areas, even with the best of intentions. Another legal hurdle was the operation's international scope. Since anom devices were used across over 100 countries, legal authorities had to navigate a maze of differing privacy laws, surveillance regulations, and extradition agreements. Not all countries viewed the operation through the same legal lens. Some questioned whether evidence collected through anom would be admissible in their courts. Others were concerned about sovereignty issues, especially when domestic communications were captured by foreign agencies. Despite these concerns, extensive collaboration between agencies like Europol, the Australian Federal Police, and the US FBI helped smooth legal pathways for prosecutions. Defense attorneys for some of those arrested raised the issue of entrapment. They argued that by running anom, law enforcement might have induced or encouraged criminal acts that otherwise wouldn't have occurred. However, most legal experts rejected this claim. They pointed out that law enforcement didn't create criminal intent. Anom users were already engaged in trafficking drugs, weapons, and illicit goods. They simply used what they believed was a safe platform to discuss it. As one prosecutor put it, "We didn't invent the crimes, we just listened while they planned them." Finally, Operation Trojan Shield raised broader philosophical questions. Should governments be allowed to run and control platforms used for private communication, even if targeted at criminals? Where is the line between strategic policing and mass surveillance? Some cybersecurity experts warned that this operation could erode trust in all encrypted platforms, even legitimate ones, potentially harming privacy rights for regular users worldwide. Others saw it as an inevitable evolution. In a world where criminals increasingly hide behind encrypted communications, law enforcement must adapt, or risk being left blind to dangerous activities. Operation Trojan Shield wasn't just another sting operation. It represented a turning point in the way law enforcement agencies confront modern organized crime. The scale, ambition, and success of the operation revealed critical insights about criminal behavior, technology, and the future of policing in a digitally connected world. One major lesson was how overconfidence and complacency played a role in the downfall of so many criminal organizations. The very groups that prided themselves on avoiding surveillance were eager to adopt anom, simply because it came with the right branding and an illusion of exclusivity. The app's invite-only nature, stripped-down devices, and marketing through trusted criminal insiders gave it credibility. Criminals assumed they were smarter than the authorities. They weren't. Trojan Shield exposed a core vulnerability in organized crime: trust in technological solutions without proper scrutiny. The operation also demonstrated that law enforcement can out-innovate criminals when necessary. Instead of reacting to criminal innovation, chasing after new encrypted platforms, agencies flipped the script. They created the communications environment themselves. They collected intelligence at the source without having to break sophisticated encryption post factum. They patiently built strong legal cases over years instead of rushing in after each intercepted conversation. This model, proactive, patient, and deeply strategic, could redefine how future criminal investigations are conducted, especially against transnational networks. Trojan Shield's success was not the result of one agency's actions. It was the product of unprecedented international cooperation. Dozens of countries worked together, sharing intelligence in real time, coordinating assets and raids across time zones, harmonizing legal processes to ensure admissible evidence. This type of coordination showed that global crime needs global policing. No single country can tackle sophisticated criminal networks alone. However, the operation also underscored the ongoing ethical and legal balancing act that law enforcement must navigate. How do you balance privacy rights against the need for security and safety? When does undercover digital operations cross the line into mass surveillance? How do you maintain public trust in secure communications without giving criminals free rein? These are not easy questions, and they will only become more complicated as technology advances. Finally, authorities recognize that criminal organizations are learning. Since Trojan Shield's exposure, criminals have become more cautious. They've diversified their communication channels, returned to in-person meetings, and shifted toward customized private encryption solutions. The lesson for law enforcement is clear. The battle between criminal innovation and investigative innovation will never stand still. Operations like Trojan Shield buy critical time, but they do not end the arms race between crime and policing. When historians look back at Operation Trojan Shield, they will likely see it as a milestone in the evolution of modern law enforcement. Not with brute force, not with mass surveillance in its traditional sense, but with a carefully crafted deception, a Trojan horse for the digital age. Criminals, believing they had found safety, invited law enforcement into their innermost circles. They discussed shipments, assassinations, and alliances and messages they thought were locked away forever. But the walls were never secure. The messages were never private. In the end, trust, not technology, was their greatest vulnerability. Operation Trojan Shield reminds us that security is a perception as much as it is a reality. Innovation in law enforcement is just as critical as innovation in crime. Collaboration across borders is no longer optional, it is essential. And it also leaves us with important questions for the future. As law enforcement develops more sophisticated methods, how do we protect individual rights while ensuring public safety? As criminals adapt and evolve, how do we stay ahead without crossing ethical boundaries? In the shadowy world where crime and technology intersect, nothing stays hidden forever. And sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a badge, it's an app, a carefully built trap hidden in plain sight. This was Operation Trojan Shield, a reminder that in the 21st century, the fight for justice doesn't just happen in the streets, it happens in the unseen corners of the digital world. If you found this story eye-opening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.